How you doing, everybody? Welcome to my channel. This is You Too Can Be Great. Y'all saw the title of what I posted and what we're going to be discussing today. So a lot of YouTubers I've noticed have not picked up the story. Maybe because they feel like they might be blackballed, or they might not be, the video might be flagged, or whatever the case is. I don't want to speak about it. I chose to talk about it because I wanted to clarify a few things that I understood out of the interview that he did. Now, he who shall not be named did an interview, and in that interview, he said a few things that people interpreted as hateful speech. You know what I'm saying? Or not necessarily people, but other people that were high up there interpreted as hateful speech. I didn't interpret it that way because of what I'm going to say, but that's what it was interpreted. Because of that, he lost a lot of his career opportunity. Viacom fired him and refused to hire him. He's now angry because he's saying that he wanted the ownership of Wild 'N Out because he made money from them on that show, and he has his own radio show to include. He was very successful, and one thing in his career, and being opinionated and speaking his mind, becomes something that he loses his entire career for. Meanwhile, we have a political system where everybody's out there saying whatever they want to say in politics, and they don't get the same treatment as some of these celebrities that go out there. Kevin Hart had an issue because he said something that was unkind to a certain community years back, and when he was invited to be the host of one award show. I forgot, maybe it's the Grammys or something like that. I don't pay attention to stuff like that. Then they asked him to apologize. He refused, and he lost that opportunity. Then he went on an apology tour. I already saw this apology coming because I knew that there would be a lot of pressure on him for speaking things that are essentially facts. They are facts, and they're not facts because he was being cruel or saying that everybody that doesn't look like us is terrible or horrible. They were facts because historically and currently this is what has been proven. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm going to break it down in a way that maybe people might understand, because he said in the thing, he's like, Europeans, they're hateful and stuff like that. I think that's what he said in his speech. And then, or in his interview, he spoke about that. And he also wanted to let people know that in that time period, there has been no other person who has suffered to the extent that a lot of black folks have suffered. And he now referred to black Americans or black people in this country as Hebrews, and that we need to know who we are, which those are factual. It's not wrong. But he's speaking from a biblical perspective. There are a lot of people that may not believe the Bible, or may believe some parts of the Bible and then ignore the rest. So they don't really pay attention to what it really says. So let me break it down to you as to why he said what he said. Now, we know Book of Genesis, they talked about the beginning of the earth, how it was created. But as time went by, we learn of, the ark, what happened with Noah, and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem means name, Ham means darker black, and then Japheth is to enlarge, right? We know that Ham, being black, he was one of the ones that went and saw Noah in his nakedness after the flood, and there was a curse put on one of his descendants, Canaan, saying that Canaan will be servants of servants, and that was what they called the curse of Ham, but it should have been the curse of Canaan because it was specific to Canaan. With Shem and Japheth, they were supposed to live somewhat peacefully. However, Japheth was supposed to enlarge. But the method to which his descendants and his nations were supposed to enlarge wasn't exactly clarified in the scripture of how that was going to happen. So we're not giving any information as to what they're going to do. But if you look at the genealogy online, I'm going to post the links of where I'm getting this information from so y'all can see it for yourself, the photos and everything like that. Japheth was supposed to have been, Japheth had a few sons, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Haven, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. And it says Gomer's people, descendants from his nations, were inhabitants of Germany, Crimea, Cambria, the Celtics, and Ashkenaz was a son of Gomer, and Ashkenaz also resided in Germany. He was the Saxons, they were Scandinavians. He had Rephath to Gomer. For Magog, it was Georgia, and Scythians. For Medai, it was Medes, Aryans, Indians of India. The Indians of India are part of the Japheth genealogy. And if you look at the history of the Indians, they actually say that their forefather's name is Japetos, and Japetos was Japheth in their language. Then you had Javan, who were the Ionians, the Greeks, the Spaniards, the Cyprus, Rhodes, Moscow, which are Russians and stuff like that, Thrace. And then for Ham, because they're black, were Cushite people that inhabited Ethiopia. They had black Arabs in Arabia, Sabians. They had Nimrod. Nimrod had Babylon, because Nimrod was the ruler of Babylon, and they were extreme pagans. They had Egypt. Original Egyptians were black. The Egyptians of today are Japheth's genealogy. They're not the original Hamites that were there when the Israelites were enslaved under after Joseph's time, when Moses was there. And then under Shem, we had Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, and under Arphaxad we had Eber, where the Hebrews come from. And then down the line we had Terah, who had Abraham, the father of Isaac, the father of Jacob, who now bore under him came the 12 tribes of Israel, right? Now, when people talk about Jewish is like a religion, more so referring to the religion that you adopt. When you mention Hebrew is the language that they spoke, and Israelites are the people that were chosen in the scriptures. In the book of Genesis, they illustrate when Jacob worked hard to get 7 years to marry Rachel. Instead, their father gave him Leah, and then he had to work another 7 years to get Rachel. And Rachel's first son was Joseph, and Joseph had the gift of foresight by his visions that he had in his dreams. And his brothers were jealous of him. They sold him to slavery in Egypt. Egyptians at the time were black, and they didn't differentiate between skin color. It was just more so they had slaves, and that's what it was. And Joseph was sold into slavery. While he was in slavery, he interpreted the Pharaoh's dreams and became more powerful than anybody in Egypt aside from the Pharaoh. And through his dreams, he was able to recognize that there was 7 years of plenty in Egypt, and there was 7 years of famine, and he was able to save Egypt. With that said, all the tribes of Israelites came over to Egypt by way of Joseph because of the famine. Generations passed by, that history is lost. Then we have the Israelites now in Egypt. They've now grown in number, right? And the Egyptians have re-enslaved them because they forgot the things that Joseph had done for them and saved their lives. Time had gone by. And the Pharaoh wanted to murder all the firstborn sons of the Israelites because they were growing in numbers, and he felt like they may one day overpower them. Moses was cast to sea by his mother, and he landed in the Egyptian palace and became a son of the Pharaoh by adoption and was raised in royalty. Later on, he had to come back and save his people. Now, that type of slavery, that period of slavery with the Israelites is what people are associating with the 400 years of slavery that they're talking about. That's inaccurate. The Israelites in Egypt during the slavery back then, they knew who they were. They knew who Elohim was. They worshiped their God. They knew who they were as a people. They weren't lost to the extent of where a lot of the African Americans and a lot of black folks all over the world that were spread out are, to the fact that they don't even know where they come from. It's not the same. And after, in the book of Exodus, Moses have gone, rescued them, and took them to the promised land. The curses that were supposed to befall the Israelites in the Bible didn't happen until the book of Deuteronomy. After the book of Leviticus. Leviticus had the laws. Deuteronomy came the curses. And I'm going to put the chapters in the comments so you can go and specifically look at the chapter and see the specific curses that were supposed to befall the Israelites if they lose their way. Throughout time, Israelites have been displaced time after time after time to their final destination, I believe, was in West Africa, at the cusp of the Atlantic Ocean. You'll find Israelites in Ghana, Angola, Nigeria, Cameroon, some in I know that Yoruba tribes have Israelites in there. Igbo tribes do. The Akan tribe, the Edo tribe, Ibibio tribe, the Mandinkan tribe, Mende, a few Fulanis were stolen, not stolen, during the transatlantic slave trade. That were taken across the sea to South America, Latin America. Portuguese came, Spaniards came, Europeans eventually joined them. Europeans' genealogy under Japheth weren't originally Europeans. Europeans were previously known as Romans and Greeks, and they have Russians. And throughout generations, there's been a great evils that has occurred on a massive scale. That doesn't necessarily, I wouldn't attribute it to race, because race didn't matter way back when. It was more so the descendants of people. Now, mind you, the scripture said that Japheth was supposed to enlarge. It didn't tell us how they were going to enlarge. It didn't tell us that they were going to kill people and steal their lands. It didn't tell us that. It just said that they were going to grow, enlarge. Now, they're the smallest nation compared to his other brothers. Shem and Ham have bigger nations under them than Japheth. They're the smallest one, but they seem to be the ones who control the powers that be. Germans colonized South Africa, and South Africa, including the Ashkenazi Jews, also went to South Africa, and South Africa had apartheid. Y'all were familiar with the story, right? Romans had slaves. Back then they had Moors, and when they fought with the Carthaginians, Punic Wars, race wasn't an issue. In North America, it wasn't until 1500s, I believe, that race became a huge thing, and it was done deliberately to establish a hierarchy that benefited one race and every other person that wasn't under that category got the shitty end of the stick. The 400 years of slavery that occurred here doesn't compare to what the Ashkenazi Jews endured when they were in Germany. Now, we know about the Holocaust that happened, I believe, in the 1950s. I believe it was about 4 or 5 years that it lasted. And it was one of the most horrible things that have ever occurred in history, is that you have people being marched to gas chambers and being burned to death or gassed to death. That was a horrific thing that you can do to somebody. I don't approve. However, 4 years in comparison, and what happened to them, as horrific as it was, is not the same thing. In the book of Deuteronomy, if we're going to compare it, it says your children will be taken and sold into slavery. Your wife you will marry a woman and another man will lay with her. All these things are things that happened in North America, South America, and Brazil, when a lot of the Israelites were ferried from across the Atlantic Ocean and taken to countries they didn't know of. And it also says that your children will be taken to countries they do not know of. And in those countries, they will not know who they are. I have met a majority of black folks that if you ask them to trace their ancestry, they will not be able to tell you. Lil Wayne just did his ancestry, a bloodline, and traced back and said he was 50% Nigerian. He's like, I got to talk to my mama. 50% means my father had to have been Nigerian for me to be 50%. And he just found out recently. So what he said wasn't necessarily a hateful speech. There's this thing that's going around in this country that if you say things, and people might say that, they'll call you BIGOT, or they say that you're phobic or something like that. But I'd rather somebody call me names than institute laws that affect my daily life. I can deal with words all day, every day. But when your actions are affecting my livelihood, to where I'm not being treated fairly, to where I'm not being able to enjoy a land where I was born in. Black folks now, generations down since slavery, they're born here. They are citizens. They're supposed to be able to experience this world in the same caliber as you, but you refuse to give up your privilege. And to be honest, race has something to do with it. It does. And so when he said that there's a sense of evil and wickedness, if you look at the media conglomerates, people who control the media right now, the majority or 90% of the information that's molding your mind, they don't look like this. They don't look like this. They don't. And they're the ones who issue the narrative of what people think is right from wrong. Nowadays, if you make a comment saying, well, I don't like this person, everybody jumps down your throat, and some people are getting death threats in their Twitter feed, because you can't have an opinion that deviates from what the media says is the appropriate thing to feel. It's improper. It's like you have freedom of speech, but you don't at the same time. I don't have to agree with how you feel. You don't have to agree with my sexuality. You don't have to agree with my lifestyle. You don't have to agree with how I make my money. But my disagreement with what you're doing does not dictate whether you get to keep your job or not. It's when you go so far as to try to hurt me personally. The Karen situation happened because she called the police and she tried to ruin his life. It wasn't like she just cussed him out. She deliberately tried to do something that physically endangered his life. When Leopold went to Congo and told them that Congo was a free state, he had a hand in what was essentially genocide in Congo and had murdered 15 to 20 million people. When apartheid occurred, there were a lot of people that died. When Belgium went into Rwanda, Germans owned Rwanda first and didn't care that the people who lived there was who owned the land. They just dictated it that it was going to be, theirs. The transatlantic slave trade was a war and a scramble for countries all over in Africa to figure out who gets what resources. Germans claimed South Africa, and they also claimed Rwanda. And from there, after World War I, they gifted Rwanda to Belgium. And then after Belgium occupied Rwanda, ethnic tensions ensued. Hence, when they left, you got the Hutus who were so pissed off at Tutus, and they murdered them because of the ethnic tensions that were created based on race, who's lighter, who's darker. In North America, there was the institution that Africans were black, that were dark, that were ugly. You had the darker ones in the field, you had the lighter ones indoors. They considered them animals, they belittled them, and so because they made them feel like the complexion of their skin, it makes them inferior, so much so that they thought they were doing them a favor when they were raping them. You had buck breaking occur, trying to break the man's spirit and make him feel like he's nothing. a man needs his pride to be able to even function as a man, and they broke that in order to sustain the slavery for as long as they did. Holocaust was 4 years, slavery was 400 years. Those two don't compare. Number two, all the curses that occur in Deuteronomy has only happened to the Israelites, chosen people, to the extent of what has happened. The Hamites in Northern Africa right now are fighting with the Black Arabs, mostly. That's what they're doing, and trying to figure out who gets what. West Africa is the countries that were ravaged, where a lot of slaves were taken, or a lot of Africans, Israelites were taken. They haven't fully recovered from that. You know, when you displace somebody and put them, you know, and destroy their environment and put them in a world they don't understand and tell them to navigate their lives, it's not easy. There is the monument, Igbo landing in Georgia, where Beyonce made a song out of, where a lot of Igbo tribe that were taken got off the ship and ran into the river and drowned themselves because they just didn't want to be slaves. You had a lot of revolts, you have a lot of riots, and then even after slavery occurred and they tried to, you know, people didn't even know they were free until Juneteenth. Then you had the Jim Crow, the Black Codes, all these things until we got to, I believe, Nixon's time and Reagan's time, where it was the war on drugs, but it was like the war on blacks and prison systems, when millions of people were hoarded in. You got a lot of minors, 15, 14, 13 years old, being tried as adults and given 50, 60-year sentences. There are some people right now in Angola prison that have been in there since they were 13 years old, and they're in their 60s. Even if you put them out in society, they wouldn't even know what to do. So I think that when he talked about wickedness at its core, it's not that he's saying that everybody that doesn't look like this is just wicked at their core. He's talking about the individuals who have been controlling our lives on a massive scale. And in politics right now, if you look at the Congress and Senate and stuff like that, majority of them are not very diverse. You understand what I'm saying? So I think that's what he meant. I don't think that he meant it to be a hate. I don't think he meant it to be a hurtful thing. I think that for him, from what I've seen so far with interviews that he's done, the people that he's had, the conversations that he's had, the people he's surrounded himself with, he's not a person who looks at a person and thinks of them as wicked based on, you know, the color of their skin. I think he's talking about historically what we've seen and what has occurred, and biblically was written, because Hebrews, Israelites are not the same as what people are attributing today. The Israelites right now in Israel are not the originals. They're under the category of Japheth. Russians are under the category of Japheth, according to what history shows. I'm just reading what it says. The Scots, the Scandinavians, the Vikings, they're all under the, I'm sorry, people keep calling me when I'm making my videos, but they had a lot to do with a lot of the displacements of people's lives in a lot of countries, and they've used that method to enlarge. Native Americans that were once here as well, same thing. Now, Miss Owens went and did an interview saying that Native Americans were cannibals, so it may, you know, they were saved by the Europeans that came and colonized this country. That's not true. In Ethiopia, there's a tribe, a small tribe, and they practice something called Mingi, right? If y'all don't know what it is, there's something called a Mingi child. A Mingi is a person that they feel like if you were born out of wedlock, or if you had this child without the blessing of the elders, or if this child was born and their bottom teeth grew first before their top teeth, you're considered a Mingi. And so they think that you are a curse amongst the people, and you're going to be the reason why they're cursed. So generally they take them and they murder them and leave their bodies out for wolves. These are nomadic tribes in the middle of nowhere. You know, they're farmers, type of stuff. They don't know any better than other than culture and tradition, and they've been passed down generations. Is it right for anybody to go there, whether European, Egyptian, to go there and mass murder them, take their lands, and then say that they did it to save their lives because they were killing children? No, if that was the case, an education should have occurred where you go there and explain to them that these children are not responsible for some of the stuff that happens. It's not they're just born. You educate them. You don't go there under the pretenses that you're trying to educate them and then dislocate them and steal their lands and say you did them a favor because they were cannibals. That doesn't make any sense. That backwards thinking is what justifies slavery to some people. Because they said blacks were animals, they were unintelligent, they were this, they were that, and so they justified what they were doing because they were only good enough to work. There was, in the European Museum, in the library, they actually have artifacts where they said that the Igbo people of Nigeria, the women were so beautiful, and the men were intelligent, and they were scientists, they were mathematicians, and that's why they wanted them to come to their country, because they felt like they could use them for work. But then when they came to the country, they said they were animals and they were so ugly and they were barbarians. If these people were minding their business and you came and took them out of their environment and you forced them into hard labor for generations and generations of time, but you're calling them the barbarians? It's almost like this is what we interpret as wickedness, is when you do something so foul. It's like when you deal with, same thing happens with abuse. The person who's abusing you is making you feel like it's your fault that you're being abused because there's something wrong with you. That logic has been used time and time again by oppressors and predators. So I think that that's what he meant when he did what he did. I don't think that it was fair for what happened to him. I really feel bad. I hope he's able to pull through, because he did post something on Instagram that was very concerning. I feel like he's really going through it right now psychologically, and I hope that he pulls through, because the African American, the Black community did support him when he said what he said, because it was facts. But the people who are in control of his career and in control of the environment that he works in don't look mostly like us. So he lost his position there, and he had to come back and apologize because he offended what? It was too much. I just think that nowadays people need to just stop worrying about what people say and pay more attention to their actions. I can deal with your words. I've had people call me TWAT, CUNT, BITCH, NIGGER. So far as your words aren't affecting what's happening into my daily life, you can have your personal opinions. You can take it and go straight to hell. So far as the rules and the laws you're making are not affecting my personal life, your words are your own. You know, but it seems like society and the media has made words more important than actions, because your feelings is what it is. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but let me go ahead and mess with your life in this way. Don't make sense. Anyway, I hope you guys are able to get some information out of this. I will post the links of some of the information I got so you can do your research for yourself if you want to at the bottom of this video. I do hope this video don't get flagged, because I don't think I did anything to insult anybody. And please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. If you have any questions, leave them below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my knowledge. If it's a respectful thing, I'll respond in a respectful manner. It's just open conversation, you know. Look it up and see, because I don't think that what he said was incorrect at all. Historically, it's just not. Facts. Bye.